Our Across the Aisle segment tonight. Should Republicans give up on President Trump in order to save their own party? According to our next guest, President Trump threatens to create irreparable harm to the Republican brand, and Republicans would be better off just cutting their losses. I disagree entirely. With me now, professor and author of Obama's America, A Transformative Vision of Our National Identity, and the author of this article, Ian Reifowitz. Ian, good to see you.
Well, Liz, I'm honored to be both commentator and subject of this segment.
That makes this segment all the more fun here. I mean, the title of your article, To Save Their Party, Republicans Must Sacrifice the Trump Presidency. That is a perfect Huffington Post title. Absolutely what their readers want to hear. I do want to read a part of your article, if I may, aloud to our viewers so that they can be familiar with what we're talking about, but also so that I can ask you a couple questions about it. So you start out the article by saying, the Republican Party is Dr. Frankenstein and Donald Trump is its monster. Yes, there were some exceptions, but the fact remains that, in particular by opposing in a knee-jerk fashion everything Barack Obama proposed and by nurturing white grievance and white identity politics, the GOP created Trump. They chose him as their nominee. They rallied around him and they made him their champion. So that's the beginning of the article, the first paragraph. And I have to ask you, do you buy into these personal attacks on President Trump? Because when I look back at the Obama presidency, I have nothing personal against the man. He was a good president. He seems like a good president, not in policy-wise, but he did nothing dangerous. He was a good husband. He was a good father. But when I look at his policies, they left us, the everyday American people, worse off. If you look at Obamacare, if you look at the Iran deal, if you look at climate change policies, these are the things that President Trump is overturning, not because he has something personal against President Obama, but just because Obama's policies left us worse off.
Well, I would consider that what I wrote in that article to be an attack, if you want to use that word, which is fine, on policy and on political and on ideological grounds. I mean, I don't want to talk all day about personal attacks, but I didn't attack the man's character. I didn't attack his personality. I have serious problems with his policies, but more than that, I have problems with his handling of his office. Those are part of his duties. Those are certainly not personal attacks. And I have serious problems with the ideological approach he takes to the presidency and with the rhetorical approach he takes to the presidency. And I want to make clear that he is, although taking it to another level, he is a creature of what Republicans have done going back. I mean, if you know Lee Atwater's famous interview where he talked about the Southern strategy, where he talked about how you can't say the N-word anymore, but you can still appeal to voters who want to hear that word by talking about them in other ways, with Willie Horton ad. Donald Trump is taking what Republicans have done, but taking it to another degree, and it's time for Republicans to cast that aside and be a conservative party on ideology, but one that rejects racial division. I think that would be a worthy party to have in a vibrant two-party system.
Wait a second. No, when you're going back, when you're talking about opposing him ideologically, I mean, I know we're on different sides of the political aisle here. Of course you don't agree with his policies, just like I didn't agree with President Obama's policies. But what you're saying in this article is that he's opposing in a knee-jerk fashion everything Barack Obama proposed. That makes sense if you have a president that's on an opposite side of the fence. If you have a president that follows an opposite political philosophy, of course they're going to try to overturn the previous president, just like President Obama did to President Bush in many different respects. That doesn't make someone a nurturer of white identity politics or a white nationalist.
Well, certainly not. I agree with you 100%. He could oppose every single policy Barack Obama ever proposed, ever thought of, or whichever crossed Obama's mind, and that would not in any way make him white nationalist or white supremacist. It's the things he said. It's things like after the Charlottesville rally, talking about the white nationalists and saying, well, you know, there were fine people on both sides. Or excuse me, there were some very fine people on the white nationalist side. No, if you go out and march with white nationalists, people who raise their arms in Nazi salutes, who chant Jews will not replace us, no, you're not a fine person. There is nobody on that side who is a fine person. But you compare that sort of quote-unquote even-handedness about the white nationalists to what he said about the black NFL players who don't stand for the flag. You can agree with them or disagree with them, but he just called them sons of bitches. He didn't say, well, there are some fine players on that side, but some of them are sons of... No. He coddles white supremacists. There's a reason white supremacists like Richard Spencer celebrated his election.
Wait a second. I agree with you on your point. There's nobody good on the side of white supremacy. That we agree on. We actually talked about that at the time of Charlottesville. President Trump should have come out and said immediately that he condemned white supremacy. The fact that it took him 2 days, he got a lot of flack for it. I'm glad that he came out and clarified what he had to say. But going back to what you're saying about the NFL players, so you think, and let me just clarify here, because the premise of your article is that Republicans should essentially find a constitutional way of impeaching President Trump, getting rid of him and not having him serve his 4 years in office. Republicans must sacrifice the Trump presidency. Halfway down your article, it talks about different constitutional ways that Republicans can do that. That's not arguable that you're making that argument in your article here. But are you saying because President Trump called NFL players that name, SOBs, and I'm not sure, by the way, if we're allowed to say that word on our show, if they called them SOBs, that is grounds for sacrificing the entire presidency and throwing him out of office?
Look, I have to clarify, and if it's unclear, that's on me as a writer. But I talked about impeachment and I talked about the 25th Amendment, but I said that that's not what I'm talking about in this article. I said that those are things that if, Mueller found something terrible, that the Republicans could go along that way. But I said I don't want to see them do that necessarily. That's not what I'm talking about here. What I was talking about was that they, enough of them basically stand up and say, we're not going to pass any of his legislation. We're going to spike this presidency through voting against, the major priorities that he wants, so that it's an unsuccessful presidency, so that it doesn't succeed, so that it doesn't take over the Republican Party forever.
Why would they do that? None of what he's passed, his executive orders, his deregulations, legislation that he's signed into law, none of it is counter to our Constitution. None of it encompasses any of the accusations that you throw at him of white supremacy or of being someone of a personality that you dislike. None of it does. If you actually look at his list of accomplishments, it's actually fairly traditional. It's what we might have expected from any of the Republicans that were on those primary debate stages a year and a half ago. It's not atypical, and this is the problem that I have with articles like yours, or this parrots the narrative that's coming from the Democratic Party that Trump is something other than normal. Yes, he tweets. Yes, sometimes he tweets things that perhaps he ought not to tweet, but no high crimes and misdemeanors have happened. He's been a typical Republican president, and there's no reason for any logical Republican not to support what he's doing, because he's putting the safety and the security of the American people first and upholding our Constitution. That's what we elected him to do, and he's doing it. Ian, thanks for coming on the show and talking about your article. They are yelling at me in my ear, so I do have to go, but I'll talk to you next week.